Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGeek Webinars, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key of enhancing our performances and for our growth as professionals. With this principle in mind, TechGeek has initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to get a crisp insight of various domains. Today's webinar is 12th in the series and will give insights into HTML5, CSS3, and offline apps. Our guest speaker today is Shwetank Dikshit, Web Evangelist at Opera Software. Shwetank works as a Web Evangelist. He is also part of the W3C Mobile Web for Social Development Group and the Web Standards Project International Liaison Group. He is co-steering Opera's Open the Website Compatibility project, which involves working with the biggest web properties in the world and ensuring with them and advising better coding methodologies. He is also involved in evangelism of open web standards and represents Opera Software in various events, seminars, and conferences. His main interests and expertise include present and upcoming web standards, best practices for accessible design and mobile development, as well as the social impact of mobile technology. He is an avid writer, and his interviews and articles have been published in various leading newspapers and technology magazines. This presentation will continue for the next 45 minutes, and we will take your questions in the last 15 minutes. In the meanwhile, you can post your queries on techgeek.com or through the chat available in webinar software. Without further ado, I introduce to you our guest speaker, Shwetank.
Hello. So
Yes, Shwetank.
I guess you guys can hear me?
Yes, Shwetank.
Good. So I just want to check whether my screen is available. It's being
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Good. So yes, welcome everyone. This presentation would be about HTML5, and not just HTML5, but as I said in the software in the presentation, HTML5 and friends, which basically means HTML5 is not just one technology. It's a combination of different things, but the HTML5 specification is just one thing, and the other standards around it are kind of like their friends, and they all work together to achieve the web of the future. So that's what we're going to talk about. The HTML5 specification, as well as other related technologies and how they will be useful to us. This presentation might take longer than 45 minutes, or might even take a little bit less than 45 minutes. But either way, just feel free to post your questions, and I'll try to answer them as best that I can. So let's start. And before that, I just want to check whether this is working. Can you see the whole slide? I guess not. So okay, I'll just do it like this. So as Bharat has introduced me, I work for Opera Software, and I work as a web evangelist for Opera Software in the developer relations team. It's actually I've been working here for about 3 or 4 years now, 4 years, and I'm also part of the W3C Mobile Web for Social Development Group. On Twitter, my name, it's just my ID, Shwetank. And if in any case you want any kind of extra answers to your questions, you can just email me at shwetank@opera.com. Right? So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that there's so many technologies. Can you see the slide properly?
Yeah, we can see that.
The whole slide? Okay, that's good. So as you can see, there are plenty of technologies for you to learn as a front-end developer. You have SML, you have SVG, you have the DOM, you have JavaScript, CSS. You have so many things to learn, right? And this isn't even a complete list. The number of technologies that the W3C is working on, this is just a very, very small subset. Right? So, but these are just the essential things that you're supposed to learn, and which is very, very important. As a front-end developer, you have to pick and choose which technologies you want to specialize in, right? Which is kind of like a challenge, because there's so many things to pick from and so many things to learn that sometimes you get overwhelmed. So with this presentation, I wanted to focus on the stuff which is really, really cool, the stuff that you really should learn about, because even a few months down the line, you will really, really need it. So the first thing is that I'll be talking about the stuff that I find really cool, which is first HTML5. So when I talk about HTML5, I talk about the actual HTML5 specification, right, which is on the W3C or on the Webwig. There are a few other companies which go around saying that HTML5 is everything which is new in the web, which I and many other people don't agree with. HTML5 is the specification, and it's called HTML5. And then there are different technologies which are peripheral, which are related but not actually part of the specification, right? So the next few slides would be about the HTML5 as defined in the actual specification, right? But before we do that, let's come around to its origins. How did HTML5 actually begin, and what does it mean in the future, and what's this present state? So HTML5 actually began quite humbly. Initially, I guess many people actually remember the days of XHTML and people coding in, XHTML 1.0 strict or 1.0 transitional. That was the way in which the W3C actually thought the web is going to go. But us browser vendors actually, when we took a look at what developers are doing, we found that about maximum 3-4% of the web is actually valid XHTML. Most of the web wasn't really valid XHTML at all. So we were thinking, oh, okay, we need a new standard for the web which developers are actually following, because if there's a web standard which no one is following, what's this use? So Apple, Opera, and Mozilla, we formed a group of our own. It's called the Webwig, and later on other people also joined. And we decided to work on our own implementation of HTML5. Initially it was called Web Applications 1.0. And later on, we kind of renamed it as HTML5 because that's a much better nickname for it, and much more sticky and rememberable as well. Later on, the WCC started to see how much traction, HTML5 is starting to get, and how little traction XHTML 2.0 is getting. So they said, okay, we'll listen to the developers and we'll abandon XHTML 2.0 as the next standard, and we'll adopt HTML5 as the next standard for the web. So this is the whole background story of how HTML5 actually began. It actually began in opposition by the WCC, but later on they kind of came around to the idea of HTML5 being the proper next standard for the web. When it comes to HTML 4.01 or 4 or 3 or 2 or whatever, everything before HTML5 the focus was on web pages. You make a page, you put some markup in it, and that's it. The focus was on web pages because people at that time didn't realize the full power of the web. How, or in what way companies or web developers will start using it. But later on we found out, people are taking the web really, really far. People are doing stuff like Google Maps and Flickr and a whole bunch of various applications. They felt like actual applications rather than just a simple web page, right? So one of the core goals of HTML5 was to focus on web applications rather than just web pages. To focus, the whole idea behind HTML5 was to make sure that we have a proper standard through which people can make applications on the web, rather than just mere web pages. The whole idea, everything ultimately comes down to this. Can we make a web application using this standard? There were certain goals which people kept in mind when it came to HTML5. It should be able to run offline. It should have various features that native applications have, like determining the location of the user, for example, or a whole bunch of stuff, multi-threaded applications. So there were a bunch of design goals with HTML5, which the ultimate intention was to bring it on par or even better than native applications. One more thing that I wanted to just dispel the myths, because there are many people who come around and say HTML5 is basically anything which is implemented on WebKit, because it works on Chrome and Safari and that's it. That's a very, very big misconception. HTML5 is browser agnostic. HTML5 doesn't really depend on any one browser engine, whether it's WebKit, whether it's Presto, whether it's any other kind of, or whether it's Gecko, any kind of browser or any kind of engine. HTML5 is a standard, and as long as all modern browsers support that standard, the support will be there. It's not dependent on just one particular browser engine, right? So let's dispel the myth that HTML5 is just the stuff which works on WebKit. It's not. HTML5 works on WebKit a whole lot, but it also works on Presto, which is in Opera, or it works on Gecko, which is in Mozilla, or it works on Trident, which is on IE, right? The newest versions. So each and every modern browser is working on HTML5. Right? It's not just one. Every modern browser is working on HTML5.
Shwetank, we have a feedback. Can you be a little louder?
Yeah, sure. So,
Right. Thanks.
Can you hear me now?
It is a bit okay now. Right.
So, yeah. It's audible now? I guess so. So, what I was saying was, HTML5 is browser agnostic. So it's not just dependent on one browser. Every modern browser is supporting HTML5 in various degrees, right? Some are working really, really hard. Some are working not so hard, and every browser has their own priorities, which they think they should work on when it comes to HTML5. So this is one of the most important slides, which is, why should you, as a developer, care about HTML5? And when I say HTML5, once again, I mean the actual specification, right? So why should you care about HTML5? Well, first of all, as you can see in the slide, you won't really need plugins to do audio and video. You can also make your web apps run offline. You'll be able to do programmable graphics inside a web page without any kind of plugins, once again. You'll have much more sensible and much more semantically accurate tags that you could use in your web pages. You'll have a doctype which is quite sane, and you'll be less frustrated and more happy when you're making web forms. And we'll see point by point what we mean by all of these things. So if you look at this slide, which is a slide showing how you could embed a YouTube video inside a web page. Now I guess a whole lot of people have actually implemented this, have actually put in a YouTube video inside a web page. How many people just copy and paste this inside a web page? I guess most of them, right? Most people won't even recognize what's happening in this kind of code. It isn't really that elegant a piece of code. It's not readable, it's not maintainable, and it uses a plugin, which is the main thing. Plugins crash, Plugins are not reliable. They don't run inside the browser as such. So one of the main goals of HTML5 once again was to make sure that something as basic as video and audio, these things should be part of the web. Just like you have an IMG tag, for images, and since video and audio are so much a part of the web, they should be standardized when it comes to web development. And that was one of the main aims of HTML5 as well. So now you have something called a video tag, in which you can embed video and have it play natively within the browser. So how many people think that something like this, is much more simple, much more understandable, and much easier to just code without copy pasting? All this does, we have implemented a tag called the video tag. And if you look at this code, it just says video src is equal to myvideo.webm, and that's it. It's very, very, very simple, easy to learn, and easy to implement. Right? That's the power of video. It's going to run inside the browser, and it's very, very easy to actually get a hold of it as a web developer. But that's not the only use of native video inside the web browser. One of the main use cases of having such an ability now is the fact that now you can actually combine it with different properties or different technologies to create whole new experiences that you could not with just Flash. For example, I'll just show you. Now this, okay, let me just, okay, so this is just a normal video playing inside a web browser. The code is simple. It just says video controls src is equal to video.ogg, right? The keyword controls means that whenever I hover over the video, these controls will pop up, right? If I don't have the keyword controls, then that won't happen, right? So that's all it is. And it works beautifully, no problem whatsoever, right? But that's not the only use case of video. You can combine it with different technologies. For example, there's a video like this. And what you can do is do something like this, right? So you can combine it with different technologies to move the video around, to make it transparent or translucent or whatever. There's another demo that I wanted to show you, which is this. So you have a video, but you can also do something like putting on a filter on top of it, so that you can apply different effects. For example, you have a filter which can make things blurred, but the original video is still intact. You can make things black and white, right? Or you can apply a filter which can trace the edges of the video, right? But all the time, the original video is unchanged. You're just applying different SVG filters on top of it to apply different effects to the video. So let's go around. Let's go back to the slide. So this was about online video, native video inside the browser, and how you can use different technologies to combine it and create new effects. Apart from that, let's move on. Yes, we saw an example of this. Now we come to something called offline web applications. The reason I'm mentioning this over here right now is the fact that when it comes to HTML5 and new technologies, offline applications are kind of divided into separate parts. So in the HTML5 specification itself, it deals with one part of making offline applications. And then the other part, the storing data part, is in some other specification itself. So when it comes to the HTML5 specification, it deals with how to store the files needed to run offline. Not the data, but the actual files, like the HTML file or the images or the CSS or the JavaScript files. All of these files, how will they be stored inside a web page or inside a browser, and what to do regarding that. Now, the trick is that you create a file called a manifest file. What this file does is, it's just a simple text file that you rename as .manifest, and over there the first line has to be this. The first line has to be cache manifest, right? If you want to put a comment, just put a hash in front of it. What you do then is just mention the HTML, the CSS, or the JS files that you need to be cached when the user is offline, right? So this manifest file is just providing a list of files that the browser needs to store, in a separate special cache called the application cache, right? That's what it needs to do. The thing is, how do you link a manifest file to an actual web page? How do you do that? All you need to do inside a web page is say HTML manifest is equal to that manifest file, for example demo.manifest, right? So whenever this happens, whenever a user is offline, they'll be able to view the web page, or load the web page, properly, just because those files mentioned in that manifest file are stored inside the browser, right? Which makes sense, because when you're making offline applications, you want not just the data to be there, but also the actual web pages to be there, right? You want the actual images to load, you want the actual CSS files to load, and not just the actual content within the application. And we'll come back to offline applications later on and see the other side of it, how to store the actual data. But that's a little bit later on. Now we come to programmable graphics. Now, till HTML4, if you wanted to do programmable graphics inside a web page, technically you could do that, but you had to use a plugin. You had to use something called Flash or Silverlight or any other plugin. But one of the key features of HTML5, once again, is this small tag called the canvas tag, right? The canvas tag is enormously powerful, but it's something very, very simple. The canvas tag is nothing but, just like an IMG tag, in which you can program the pixels using JavaScript. That's all it is. But the very fact that now you can do animations using JavaScript is huge, right? Previously you could not do that. You had to use some kind of plugin. But now you can actually do that. Now you can use JavaScript to program the pixels inside a predefined area inside a web page, right? And it's very, very powerful. So as you can see in this slide, it's not really that difficult to do. In the HTML file, in the HTML5 file, you do something called this. You have a canvas tag, you set the width and the height, and say the ID of that file, of that tag as well. And in the JavaScript part, you get that, by doing document.getElementById. You do something called canvas.getContext. Get the 2D context of that particular element, and then there are various predefined functions that you can use. For example, fill rect, for example, or you can draw triangles or Bezier curves, and you can do a whole bunch of these things with Canvas. The result is that you can make really, really nice animations and really, really nice applications as well. There are plenty of examples on the web of what you can do with Canvas. I'll just show you one particular example of one of our developers who actually made this, which is a small game in less than around 200 lines of JavaScript code. So let me just show you this. Where is it? So this guy actually made something similar to Wolfenstein 3D using just 2D canvas in about 200, 300 lines of JavaScript code. That's it. It uses ray tracing and everything. And this is just a very small example of what you can do with the canvas tag. You know, the tag itself is just a small thing. You know, but what you can do with JavaScript using that tag is amazing. There are plenty of tutorials even on dev.opera.com that you can, go ahead and learn and see what you can use Canvas for. How many people have gone to a web page, decided to make a web page and did something like div ID is equal to header and div ID is equal to footer and div ID is equal to nav or navigation or something? Instead of doing all of that, now in HTML5 what we've done is we've made sure that these very, very common use cases are handled by the actual browser. So instead of saying div ID is equal to header, you just say header. Div as such is just a division. So browsers or anything else, when they're trying to access that page, they don't really know the semantic meaning of what that tag represents. So for you as a web developer, it may not be that important, but for machines, for example, screen readers or search engine spiders, for them, the more they can analyze the meaning behind different tags, the better it will be for them. So these things later on will be very, very important for SEO and for making sure that things are accessible by screen readers, or these machines can make much more semantic sense of what's going on in the page, right? So let's just stop that. Okay. So where was I? Yes. So when it comes to these new tags, you have header, you have footer, you have nav for navigation, you have section to divide the page within different sections. If you're writing an article, then you have an article tag. You also have a time element, and there are a few other tags that you can take a look at. Just 1 second, maybe someone from TechGeek is calling me. Hello? Yeah. Yeah, I'm a little bit busy. Can you just call later on? After about an hour. Yeah, sorry for that. Anyways, so when I was talking about semantically important tags, what I actually meant was the fact that non-humans, screen readers or search engine spiders or later on anything else, which is trying to make sense of what's going on in the page, they will be helped by these tags. And you will also help because instead of writing div ID is equal to header, which doesn't make any kind of sense, now you'll be able to make much more sense of the page, which helps in code maintainability as well. One more thing that I was trying to talk about earlier was the fact that the doc type is much more simpler. How many people have just copy pasted a doc type? A whole lot of people actually do that. They just copy paste the doc type without even thinking what the doc type actually means and whether that particular doc type is appropriate for what they're writing in the code. So doc types have been a huge problem. They're insane, and they were really a broken thing to begin with, because many people just copy pasted it and they wrote like HTML but put in the XHTML doc type, and all kinds of, it was a whole mess. So doc types are something that we wanted to simplify in HTML5 as well. And that's why now if you wanted to have a doc type, all you need to do is just say, exclamation mark doc type HTML. That's it. If you have this at the top of your page, the browser will recognize that, yes, it's an HTML5 page. Sorry for that. There's some kind of, yeah. So doc types are also very, very important, because if you don't have this, then the browser may not know that you're writing an HTML5 page. Modern browsers, generally speaking, even if you omit this doc type, they'll treat it, using their error handling capabilities, and may recognize that maybe it's an HTML5 page. But it's always good to include a doc type specifically, saying that, okay, this is HTML5, rather than, depending on the browser to figure it out. So this is very, very important. Apart from this, and this was the original intention of HTML5 actually. So when I was talking about HTML5 and how it began as Web Applications 1.0, there's a little story even behind that. Even before that, it actually started as something called Web Forms 2.0. That was the original specification that people were working on, and the intention behind that specification was to make sure that web forms are improved on the web. Then later on, that Web Forms 2.0 snowballed into Web Applications 1.0, because they began to think that, okay, if we're making improvements to web forms, we might as well make improvements to the whole HTML specification. So that, forms are central to what HTML5, the story of HTML5. And it's also one of the biggest improvements when it comes to HTML5. The problem is, till HTML4, if you wanted to do forms, it was a huge, huge pain, because if you make forms, you also have to do validation, right? And server-side validation always has to be done, but client-side validation is also very, very important. So that's also something to take a look at and learn. Let's see an example first. Let's see an example. Let's go to my web forms demo. Or what you can also do is just go online and search for Web Forms 2 demo. And the second, or the first or second page will be my demo. This is something I made in 2008 early on, but it's still valid. The first thing that you'll notice over here in this page is the fact that autofocus is on the third form input. No, it's not on the first. That's because I entered something called autofocus. Input type is equal to text autofocus. That's why it's already autofocusing over here. Now let's enter something over here and go over here at the age. Automatically it starts at 18, and I can't do more than 25. That's because I said input type is equal to range, age, max is equal to 25, min is equal to 18. Now once again, if you wanted to verify an email address or something is an email address, you had to do a whole lot of stuff. You had to put in very, very complicated irregular expressions and a whole lot of stuff like that. But now inside the browser, what you need to do with HTML5 is just say input type is equal to email. That's it. So if you do that, and if it's not an email address, it'll say please enter a valid email address. So all of these small but very, very important form validation stuff is being done now by the browser. You don't need to enter your own JavaScript. Now if I click on this, what happens? You see this pops up? This can be used by the developer to put in their own search suggestions, for example, right? And this is something called data list. You can do that. Now, how many people have gone to, yatra.com or cleartrip.com and selected the date from over there, and a whole calendar pops up? Now, all of these things are done by JavaScript, and they're very, very complicated. Most people just take the script and put it in their own browser, or in their own pages. Now, with HTML5 web forms, what you can do is just say input type is equal to date, and that's it. No JavaScript, and you'll have this whole calendar pop up. And you can pick up, whichever date you want. One more thing is, you see the value of 0 over here? That's because it is part of an output tag. So you have an input tag, but in HTML5 you also have now an output tag, which gives you the output of the current range. So you can see over here. So all of these new cool stuff is now available in HTML5 web forms, which is very, very nice. Let's see how it's done in detail. So remember that we went, and said, okay, it cannot go more than 25 and less than 18. It's done using this. The first thing, input name is equal to age, type is equal to number, and min is equal to 18, max is equal to 25. Very easy to learn. And that will tell the browser to just have values, just accept values, which is between the ranges of 18 and 25, right? And I was telling you about email validation. So all you need to do is just say input type is equal to email, type is equal to email, required. So that required keyword will make sure that that thing will be required by the form. Otherwise, it will not be submitted. Let's go down over here. So it says input name is equal to something, date, type is equal to date. Now this, if you say type is equal to date, that whole calendar thing will pop up, right? And it'll make sure that it's a much more user-friendly experience than asking the user to enter a date in some weird Unix format, and doing the date processing yourself. Instead of that, just the browser will pop up a whole calendar, and the user can pick up any kind of date from that. So if you want to learn more about web forms, just search for Web Forms 2 demo, and over there's a link to my article on Web Forms 2 as well. And it goes over here on my blog, where you can learn more about Web Forms 2. So let's go back. Now this was just about the HTML specification, but this talk was about HTML5 and friends, which means that it's much more than just the HTML5 specification. One of the key things which was which was being worked on apart from HTML5 was also CSS3. So till now, what we used to do was CSS2 or CSS1, but now you also have CSS3. One of the key differences between CSS3 and other similar standards was the fact that CSS3 is not just one document. It's a series or a number of different specifications. So it's kind of like a modular thing. And each and every different specification defines something else. But going, that I'm just going on a tangent. But let's come back to why it actually makes sense for you as a designer to learn more about CSS3. Well, in a nutshell, the reason why is because in CSS3 you can do stuff much more simply. There was using CSS2 you could do stuff, but some of those things you required Photoshop to do or some other image editor to do. With CSS3 you can do the same things using just normal code, and we'll see how, right? You can do stuff like rounded corners or using any kind of font you like. You can even animate stuff a little bit on the page. You can rotate and skew elements. You can have text shadows, drop shadows. You can make stuff opaque, translucent, transparent. And you can also code once and have it adjust for multiple devices, which is good for mobile development or iPad development, whatever. So let's see more about CSS3. One of the most important things to learn about CSS3 is border radius. So if you go to any web page, any really well-designed web page nowadays on the web, you'll see at least one instance of rounded corners, right? So how do you do this? How do you make rounded corners? Till CSS2, if you wanted to make rounded corners, you had to make 4 separate images, one for each corner, and then apply one corner for each div. So you actually had one div, and then you had 3 wrapper divs, which had no other purpose other than to have just a corner or just have an image assigned to it. Now this thing, apart from making really bad semantic sense, also made sure that your code size is increased, it becomes less maintainable, as well as the fact that you're actually using images. So you can't really change it later on without actually opening up an image editor. So what you do now with CSS3 is use something called border radius. And what it does is it says that it defines the corner of a particular box and the size of it. So if you want all 4 corners to have the same kind of border radius, then you just say border radius 5px, for example. Then all 4 corners will have 5px. But you can also specify like different corners, and how much of a radius they should have. For example, in this code example over here, what I say is border radius 5px, 10px, 15px, and 20px. So over here what will happen is the top left corner will have 5px, the top right corner will have 10px, the bottom right will have 15px, and the bottom left will have 20px border radius, right? And this is how it goes. It goes clockwise, starting from the top left corner. Right? You can also specify it, in another way, like border top left radius, border top right radius, and stuff like that. And it really is very, very useful because you can now do a whole lot more. For example, we have this, and look at the code over here, and look at how it's changing as I'm changing the border radius. And yes, using border radius, you can even make, if you're clever about it, you can even make a div which is a complete circle, right? As in this example. It's very, very cool, and it's very, very nice to know and essential to know actually if you're a designer. Border radius. The next thing I wanted to talk about was web fonts. Till now, if you wanted to use your own custom font inside a web page, there was absolutely no guarantee that that same font will be installed on the user's computer, which meant that you couldn't really, in any realistic way, use your own font inside a web page. There were only about 6 fonts that you could use reliably across browsers and across operating systems. Stuff like Times New Roman or Verdana or Georgia, or even actually Comic Sans. So now in CSS3, we wanted to make sure that this, this hindrance is not there. So now what you do is, make use of web fonts, and it's very, very easy to do. All you say is, all you do is first define the font using the font face property, the add font face property. So the add font face property is very, very easy to learn. It just says add font face, src URL is equal to whatever the URL of the TTF font is or DOTF font is, and font family, what you're going to call it, right? So add font face is nothing but saying that, okay, this is the URL and this is what I'm calling the font. And whenever you want to use it inside a web page, just say, font, 2.5 EM or whatever, that font, right? The name you've given. That's it. You can use any TTF font or any OTF font, or something which is even better is called WAF that we'll take a look later on. But before I mention that, One thing I also wanted to say was the fact that web fonts are not just for English fonts. You can use it on pretty much any kind of font, whether it's Hindi, whether it's Malayalam, whether it's Russian, whatever. As long as the font supports that language, you can use it, right? So this is just an example of what I made, just a small page that I made, which is using different fonts. The lowest one is the system default font. And the various fonts above that are custom fonts that I've used, right? And you can see the difference in the way it's being served. So one more advantage of using web fonts is the fact that not only does it look sometimes better, but also the fact that sometimes it actually makes sure that the things are much more readable. What I've noticed, especially when it comes to regional fonts and Indian regional fonts, is the fact that if you just have the native system default font, sometimes what happens is it's not really clearly legible. But if you use a nice web font, then sometimes it becomes a little bit more legible, right? So it's not just for style. Sometimes it's for a very practical purpose. Sometimes you can use it just for increasing the legibility of fonts. So let's come back to the new format that we're going to talk about. So of course you can use any OTF font or any TTF font. But apart from that, there's a new font format called WOF, which is much better. The reason is because it's actually optimized for the web. A WOF file is basically just a zip file or a compressed file, which includes the actual TTF or OTF font, but also certain licensing information, and it also has better cross-browser support than TTF or OTF. So the reason why is because even IE will support WOF. There's a very, very good site for free fonts in TTF, OTF, or WOF font format. It's called Font Squirrel. So if you just go to Font Squirrel, right, this is the site fontsquirrel.com, and over here you'll find plenty of very, very nice fonts in TTF, OTF, or even WOF format, right? And it's very, very nice. So if you choose WOF over here, TTF, there are various file formats you can see. So you can go to add font face kits, and over there are various kits that you can use. And you can just download the zip file, which will have the licensing info. It will have the TTF or OTF or even WOF file, and it's a very, very nice place to visit and download fonts. So coming back to our presentation. So this was about web fonts and how you can use custom fonts, and we've seen the code as well. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was text shadows. So till now, if you wanted to do drop shadows on text or on boxes, you once again had to open an image editor. You had to open something like Photoshop or GIMP. But now you can do it natively inside the browser without using anything else. This is sample code of how you can do it. So on text, what you do is something called text shadow. This is the code for it. You just say text shadow, 0px, 0px, or whatever. So basically, it's the horizontal offset, the vertical offset, the blur radius, and the color, right? So over here, if it's the horizontal offset, if it's a positive value, then it goes to the right. Otherwise, it goes to the left. The next is the vertical offset. If it's a positive value, it goes towards the bottom. Otherwise, it goes towards the top. Then it's the blur radius. How much of a blur do you want on the shadow? And then you have a color for it. So let's see a small example of what I'm actually talking about when it comes to text shadow. Let's go to my site, text shadows. So as you can see over here, there are various text shadows applied in various ways. Over here, there's a different kind of text shadow. It's towards the upper right-hand side. This is a different kind of text shadow. It's much more sharp, right? It's because the blur radius is 0, and I've had it over the bottom left side of the text. And over here, there's a different text shadow over here towards the top. So it's very, very simple and easy to do. And just like you have text shadow, similarly, if you want to do a drop shadow on a div, for example, you can use something called box shadow, which works exactly the same way. There's literally no difference in the way it's used between that item. The only difference with box shadow is it will apply to a box, so it will apply to a div, for example. Right? An example of this would be one of our developers who made something like this. Notice the boxes and notice the shadows over here, right? And the blur of the shadows as well. So this is something one of our developers made just as a hobby, and you'll see box shadows applied over here very, very easily. So let's go back. One more thing which was missing when it came to CSS3 was support for multiple columns. So if you ever gone and seen a typical newspaper, you'll find that they are in different columns, or even a scientific research paper, they're in different columns. Till now, if you wanted to do that using CSS2 or 1, there were ways to do it, but there were very, very hacky ways to do it. There wasn't a proper standard way to do it. Now you have something called multi-column support in CSS3. So all you need to do is just enter your text inside a div, right? And implement these particular things. So if you wanted to have like 3 columns, just say column count 3. Then you specify the width of each column. So you say column width 100 px, for example. And if you wanted to have like a rule between them, then you say column rule 1 px solid black, right? So multiple columns is also something which is quite useful sometimes, especially if you want to do some kind of newspaper layout, or some kind of if you want to compress text inside a very constrained area, you can use multiple columns to do that, and it's very easy to do. So let's move on. Now comes one of my favorite parts of the presentation, which is CSS transforms and transitions. So if you look at the code over here, don't be overwhelmed. Just look at this part. O transition property background color, O transition duration 4 seconds, right? So transitions are basically just transitioning the state of a div or something else from one state to the other, from one property to the other. So in this case, what I'm saying is transition the background color and take 4 seconds to do it. And whenever someone hovers over this, whenever someone hovers over the div, the background color will be changed to blue. First it's red, now it's blue, right? That's it. Let's see some examples just to make sure that we get what we're trying to do. So this is a very simple example. If I hover over this, you see it changes. Something like this previously required Flash to do, but now you can do it very, very easily using just CSS transitions. All I say is, just transition the letter spacing and the opacity when I hover over this div, and take, a specified amount of seconds to do it. And you can do much more than that. You can do something like this. You can create something like a lost effect using just CSS3, transitions and transforms. One more thing that I wanted to show you was this navigation bar. So if you look at the top, it says navigation, and if I hover over this, it increases in size and pops up this navigation menu. None of this actually requires JS. I'm doing this using just CSS3. And notice also that the background color changes from white to yellow. And if I remove this, then it goes away, it turns back to white. So yeah, this is also done using just straight up CSS3, no JavaScript once again. And you'll also notice this thing. You'll also notice the did you know section, which is kind of skewed. And it also uses box shadow once again. This is also done using something called transforms. So there's a very, very nice article on this. Just search for DevOpera CSS transitions and transforms, and you'll see, you'll get a very, very nice article on how to do these things. Let's go back. Don't have much time, so I'll just rush through. One important thing was also media queries. And there's a very, very nice article on a list apart. So there's a very nice article on a list apart called Responsive Web Design by Ethan Marcotte, and it actually is a very nice introduction to media queries. Now, what are media queries? Why are they important? The reason why they're important is because when it comes to various devices, the web is not just about desktop anymore. No, it's about various devices. And all these various devices nowadays have various resolutions, various screen sizes. And how do you make sure that you write one interface using one set of CSS and it adjusts itself, according to the different widths and heights? This is done using media queries. So what you do is you say, at media all, min width 480px, max width 800px, for example. Then this particular CSS will be applied, right? And if it's less than 480px, you just say at media all, max width 480px, then this particular set of CSS will be applied, right? So using min width, max width, you can actually make sure that you make sure that various ranges of widths and heights are supported by your CSS. So you can say if the width is between this and this, then have this kind of CSS applied. If the width is between that and that, then have that kind of CSS applied, right? And you can combine it into one main CSS file and be done with it, right? So you can make sure that various screen sizes and resolutions are supported by writing CSS just once. Of course, you have to test it, and there are various emulators that you can use to test. One place for design inspiration would be media queries, media query.es, which is a showcase of sites which actually use media queries right now that you can see. And it's a very, 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 very nice site to just go ahead and look for inspiration and just see how they have implemented media queries right now. Media queries are supported on Opera, Opera Mobile, and also on the iPhone. So they're already supported, by major mobile browsers, and you can use them, today itself. You don't have to wait. Let's move on. We'll skip SVG because everyone knows what SVG is by now. We'll come back. We'll come to the concept of offline web applications that we were talking about recently. We talked about how to store the actual files, but what about the data? We can store the actual files needed to needed for the application to run offline using application cache. But what about the data? If you're making an email application, for example, you need the actual emails to load, right? So what do you do with those things? How do you store data? Till now, if you wanted to store pretty much any kind of data, you had to use cookies. But the problem with cookies is they're unreliable. There is no programmatic APIs to manipulate cookies really, and it's kind of like a hackish way to do it. And they're not really structured in any way. And the most important part is the fact that cookies are very, very small in size. The maximum amount that you can store in a cookie is usually 2 KB, but sometimes it's 4 KB in certain browsers. That's it. And 4 KB isn't really enough for nowadays, web applications to do stuff. So we needed a solution which was better than just cookies. And that's why we have something called web storage. In particular, there's a thing called local storage, which is a little bit more persistent. So if you store something using local storage, then even if you close the browser and then open it up once again, it will still be there. It's persistent. The other part of web storage is session storage. So if you close the browser and open it once again, the page, the information will be gone. So depending on the use case, use either way. Local storage is a way to store data in a much more structured format. So what you do is you store it as a key value pair. The storage you just say in your JavaScript, local storage dot set item, your key, your value. So it will store that value. And if you want to retrieve that once again in the JavaScript, you just say, a var something is equal to local storage dot get item, and then put in the key. So it'll, in the item you'll get the value for that particular key. Right? So using web storage or local storage, now you have a proper programmatic API. One more thing is the browsers which do support web storage, the default, by default, it's 5 MB per origin. So you can store much more than just 2 KB or 4 KB. You can store up to 5 MB. And even if you store more than 5 MB, if the user allows it, then you can actually store it. So let's move on to our last topic, basically, which is geolocation. This is very, very useful, and let's see how. Till now, if you want the early part of the web, it was more about this thing, which is these are my thoughts in a well-published format. Then something else happened, something which I hate to call, but it's a nomenclature. It's called Web 2.0. So it says that the motto was basically here, this is what we can all do together, and it was more about user-generated content and collaboration. And the prime example of this would be Wikipedia, right? Then something else happened. Facebook and Twitter happened, and the main motto of that was, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm thinking right now. But what's the next step? What do we do next? The next step is going to be, this is where I am right now. And there are various companies which are doing stuff on this platform. You have Foursquare, you have Goala, you even have Twitter and Facebook nowadays integrating, location information. So location information will be really big in the future. Why? Because it can be used, just think of the possibilities. It can be used in augmented reality, it can be used in, geofencing, it can be used in location-aware advertising, it can be used in a whole lot of stuff. And it's very, very simple to do. Let's see the sample code. So if you look over here, the first thing to check is whether the browser actually supports geolocation or not. So if it does, navigator.geolocation will return true, otherwise it will return false, right? So just check first of all whether navigator.geolocation returns true. If it does, then do this function over here, navigator.geolocation.getCurrentPosition, right? Over here, if it's a success, then it'll go towards a success function. Otherwise, if it's an error, it'll pull an error function, right? The success function, if it's called, then it will give you two things. It will give you the latitude and the longitude, right? That's it. That's all what the API does. It just gives you a latitude and a longitude of what the user is or where the user is, right? Now you can use those coordinates, the latitude and the longitude, to plug in into various web APIs and do stuff, right? So let's see an example of this. Let's go over here and just reload this. So I say share my location. So the browser will actually ask you whether you want to share your location or not. So if the user says yes, then it'll share the location. So what I've done over here in this page is get the coordinates and show a Google map of where the user is, get the city name, and also plug it in using the Twitter API to show all the recent tweets which mention that city, right? So this is just one of the use cases of what you can do with geolocation. There are many others as well. The sneak preview I can't show you right now, but what I'll do is just mention a few more things. When it comes to HTML5, and specifically when it comes to devices, one of the key complaints is, there's still a whole bunch of things that native applications can do, like accessing the camera or the mic or the gyroscope, or doing multi-touch stuff, which cannot be done using web applications. Now this criticism is actually pretty valid, but it won't be valid for a long time because browser makers, especially on the mobile domain, are working to make sure that these things are supported in future versions of mobile browsers. So in the future, you will see support for multi-touch. You will see support for accessing the camera and the mic, and you will see support for accessing the gyroscope. So you will see all of these things. The device orientation spec is pretty much final, and we are working, Opera is working on making sure that these things are actually implemented in mobile browsers. So in the future, you won't have much of a difference in the capabilities of a native application and a mobile application. With that, I'll conclude. We're already out of time. If you want to learn more, just go to dev.opera.com. We have a bunch of articles on how to make sure that you do HTML5 properly. Many of those are written by me actually. And if you have more questions, you can definitely ask me, or just email me at shwetank@opera.com, or just follow me on Twitter. That's it. Thank you.
Shwetank, we have already shared the couple of questions which we received during the session to you.
Let me just see. Okay, so that question thing was minimized for me. So let me just maximize it. And okay, so the first question was, what is the scope of data which is stored in local storage? Means, is it available for the page only or for the whole session? The scope is basically per origin, which means it's for that particular domain. There are two kinds of storage basically. One is local storage and one is session storage. So if you're looking for local storage, that will be persistent. But if you're looking for session storage, that will be just for that particular session. So as long as that page is open by the browser, that storage will be accessible. As soon as you close that page, that all of that information will be gone, right? So yeah, that's the thing with local storage and session storage. One more question is, can we store JSON responses too? I'm not sure in which way, but if you're talking about local storage or session storage, definitely you can store JSON. The only thing is, when it comes to local storage and session storage, it's stored as a string, right? So you have to use something called the stringify function, json.stringify, to convert it into a string and then store it. And whenever you retrieve it back, you have to convert it back from a string to an object, right? But there is, you can definitely store it. Yeah, the next question was whether local storage is the replacement of cookies. In many ways, yes, it is, and that's why it was actually made. But session cookies will still be required. They won't go away. But there are many things like storing the name of, storing the name of the user or storing the date or something like that, that you can definitely do much more reliably now with local storage. So in those ways, yes, it is a replacement of cookies. But of course, the use case of cookies will still be there. The next question is there any improvements in CSS3 about the box model of CSS2? There is. It's a tricky question, really, because there is a specification called the Flexbox model in CSS3, but it's a very, very experimental version. Right now, it's there are initial implementations by WebKit and a few others, but the Flexbox model is a good model, but it's under debate and it's under flux. So, and you can learn more about it online, but I would say just hold on to it. But there is, yes, to be short, there is an improvement when it comes to CSS3 about the box model of the CSS2. In a way in which you can do multi box layouts or fluid layouts much more easily. But I refrain from using, or explaining the Flexbox model over here in this presentation because it's still in a very high state of flux. So it's still not stable enough. Instead of telling people to download the fonts that are supported. I didn't understand this question by Nicholas. Maybe you can probably send the question again. Okay, maybe at the end of the discussion we can spend a few minutes on Geolocation API and HTML5. Okay, so we can. What exactly do you want to know about the Geolocation API? I can say the way in which it works. It works in a way in which the main idea behind the Geolocation API was to make sure that the fact that the privacy of the user is maintained. So if you look at the current implementation of the Geolocation API, we just refresh this. The browser will ask the user whether they want to share the location. I can deny it as well, right? But if I accept, it's only then that the geolocation information is being sent, right? Now, how does it work? The browser collects information regarding the IP address as well as something called Wi-Fi triangulation, right? And if you're on a mobile device, then it also uses, GPS. So it's a combination of all these things which is sent to a service provider. In this case, in Opera's and in Mozilla's and in Chrome's case, it's Google. This information is sent, to Google, which corresponds to, okay, this particular information corresponds to this address, and that information is given back, saying that, okay, this particular information means that the person is probably at this longitude and this latitude. And then we can use this to combine it with different things, different web APIs. Let's go on. Can we style validation stuff like date picker? This is actually a very, very often asked question. In the current implementation, you cannot, but the intention is to do that later on. So right now you can't really style the date picker, but there's a feedback from a lot of web developers which say that, okay, we need to style the date picker. So browser makers will be able to do that in the future. We will be able to make sure that web developers will be able to style all these controls later on. Rounded corners are not working in IE9. Hussein. So rounded corners should actually work in IE9. I'm not sure they should. I'm not from IE, so I'm not really sure about that. But the thing is, border radius is pretty well supported. Even in IE9, it should work as long as you use the standard format, which is border radius. If you use something called, if you use a vendor prefix like WebKit border radius, then of course it will just, work on WebKit. If you do something called, I don't know, Moz border radius, then it will only work on Mozilla, right? So make sure whenever you're doing border radius, just use border radius, nothing in front of it. Otherwise, it will only work on those browsers. If you use the standard one, which is border radius, then it should work on all on the latest versions of all browsers. How can we implement backward compatibility, Bhajanen? Well, this problem of backward compatibility is solvable only to a certain extent. There are various polyfills that you can use. Just search for HTML5 polyfills, and if you do that, the first thing would be a GitHub repository of various libraries which you can use to make sure that the same thing which is being shown in modern browsers is somehow duplicated in IE6 and other browsers as well. But having said that, not everything can be done in older browsers, especially stuff like geolocation. It really cannot be done. So you have to take a call and say, do I really need to support all of these things in older browsers, right? So what I would say is, some of these things are enhancements, like geolocation, for example. These are enhancements which are nice to have, but are not critical to have. So make sure that things which are critical are supported in older browsers. But there are some things which are enhancements which which might be okay to support only in the latest browsers. Let's go on. I'm a J2EE guy. How to fetch data from input tag of HTML5 and store it in our Java beans? Well, the thing is, I'm not a Java guy, so I'm not really sure about that question. Maybe you can ask a Java guy, and they'll probably be able to answer. The next question is from Arun Kumar. He says, can you show me the code base for web forms? Yeah, I actually showed you the code base for web forms, and I can show you once again if you can see it. Let me just go there. That's too far. Here you go. Yeah, here it is. So what you can also do is just search for web forms 2 demo on Google, and the first or second search result would be my page, which actually is a working demo of web forms 2. And over there you can just view source and see all of the code which is required for web forms. Apart from that, there's an article as well that I've written. Just go to my blog and you'll see that article over there. Moving to HTML5, how much challenge will we face for cross-browser compatibility? By Divya. Initially, you will face some challenges with cross-browser compatibility because some browsers will support one thing and the other browser will support some other properties, and it all depends on the various priorities that different browsers have, right? But the ultimate aim is that when HTML5, the HTML5 parser will be implemented in all browsers, then cross-browser compatibility will improve a whole lot, because the HTML5 specification states how to interpret various tags. Till HTML4, various tags, one tag will be interpreted by one browser in one way, and that same tag might have been interpreted by the other browser in some other way. But in HTML5, the specification states that, okay, this tag has to be interpreted this way. So all browsers are clear on in which way it has to be interpreted, right? So overall, cross-browser compatibility, once the HTML5 parser is there in all browsers, will increase a whole lot. But till then, you'll have to wait a little bit and test in each and every browser a whole lot. Apart from that, there may be the cases in which browsers are pieces of software, and like all pieces of software, there are bugs in each and every browser. So even if things are implemented correctly according to the specs, there may be bugs here and there, and you will have to test. So the role of testing will not decrease. You will have to test in each and every browser, because even if they've implemented according to the specs, there may be bugs here and there. The next question is by Prasad. He says, regarding offline storage cache management, how long will we be able to store? When it comes to session storage, it will be just for that session. As soon as the user closes the browser, it will be gone. But when it comes to local storage, that's persistent. So that will be forever, as long as the user does not explicitly delete that information by going into the browser settings. As long as that doesn't happen, then using local storage, that will be indefinite. That will be, pretty much as long as he doesn't delete it explicitly. The next question is by Jisha. Does all extensions of video and does it run all extensions of video and audio? No, it by extensions, if you mean the file types, then no. It has to be, and this is a very tricky issue actually. Right now, the best way to make sure that you have cross-browser video is to encode your video in something called WebM. Just search for WebM and you'll find plenty of information on that. But there are various browsers which support one thing but not the other. Safari, for example, will right now doesn't support WebM, but maybe in the future. But Opera, Chrome, and Mozilla support WebM. IE will also, they've said that they will support WebM. The only one remaining is Safari. Let's see what they do. But I think that ultimately even they will support WebM. But there is a way to do cross-browser video and audio. It's just that you'll have to do two things. You'll have to include the WebM version as well as the MP4 version, or the H.264 version. And there's a very nice article on how to do cross-browser video and audio. It's on DevOpera. Just search for everything you need to know about video and audio on DevOpera, and you'll find this information. But the short answer is that it's tricky. But the best way to do it right now would be WebM. Let's go on. Next is by Keyur. He says, about video type, now will it remain as ActiveX control, or more say we have other HTML elements like div span above it for creating mask purpose? Well, the thing is, with the video tag, you will not have any kind of ActiveX. You won't have any kind of Flash, or you won't have any kind of Silverlight plugin. ActiveX doesn't come into the picture when it comes to video. When it comes to creating masks on top of it that I was showing, that can be done using normal, SVG, and you can just do absolute positioning to make sure that it's above the video, right? So that's using just simple absolute positioning using CSS3, right? So no plugins whatsoever, nothing when it comes to ActiveX or Flash or whatever. How different, this is from Prasad, how different is developing a mobile app and desktop web app using HTML? I mean, there need to be take any measure for rendering the UI on different devices. You have to define what you mean by mobile app. Do you mean a native mobile app, or do you mean a native web app on mobile? If you mean a native, if you mean a web app on mobile, then it's the same as developing a web app on desktop. But if you're trying to make sure that you're making a native application on mobile, then yes, there are differences right now. And the differences are mainly in terms of language. So if you're doing a native app on mobile, then first of all you'll have to pick which OS are you going to develop for, because if you're doing an iPhone app, then you'll have to do on Objective-C. Then you have to learn Objective-C. If you're doing Android, then you'll have to do Android development in Java and stuff. So depending on the different platform, when it comes to native apps, you will have to learn different languages. But when it comes to the web, then obviously you just have HTML. And using media queries and the viewport meta tag, you can make sure that whatever HTML you have and whichever device they have, it will scale properly and it will adjust itself properly, as I showed you. So when it comes to HTML, there's not much difference. But when it comes to making a native app, then of course there are differences, and most of those differences have to pertain to the language. So yeah, I guess these were all the questions. If you have any more questions, then let me know, and you can also ask me, on email or on Twitter.
Right.
So with that, I guess I'm done.
Yeah. Thanks, Shwetang, for your session on HTML5, CSS3, and offline apps. It was indeed an enlightening session. I would like to thank our participants for their support in making this webinar a huge success. Due to lack of time, we are unable to take the other queries because we have overshot by almost 20 minutes by now, and because of the response, tremendous response from the audience, we have extended this session. The recording of this webinar will be available on TechGeek tomorrow, so you guys can, this video will act as a ready reference for you. So see you all on next Wednesday. And in case if you want to know about more on this particular topic, you can send in your feedback to bharat.reddy@timesgroup.com, so that in case all your queries are not answered, we can have one more session from Shwetang to address this. You can write to us at my email address, which you can see on the screen. Thanks, Shwetang. Thanks for your time today.